Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. He was rich, arrogant, untouchable. To him, respect was earned by money, not by kindness. And when a tired old delivery man knocked on his gate, he laughed, mocked, humiliated him. But what he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was who that man really was. A truth buried in silence, a family broken by sacrifice, a love that never stopped watching from a distance. This is the story of a boy who had everything until he found out what he was missing. And when he finally opened his eyes, it wasn't to judgment, but to something deeper. He mocked a delivery man until he found out who he really was. It was just past noon, and the sun draped itself arrogantly over the wealthy neighborhood of Hillside Grove, where silence was golden and everyone paid for it. Inside one of the largest mansions sat 17-year-old Adrian Kingsley, sprawled across a velvet couch, phone in hand, scrolling through yet another viral prank video. His fingers paused as the doorbell echoed faintly in the distance. 3 polite chimes followed by a soft knock at the side gate. Adrian groaned, not because he was annoyed, but because answering the door felt beneath him. "Where's Jonas?" he muttered, referring to the housekeeper too lazy to get up himself. He reluctantly stood, adjusting his designer hoodie, the one that cost more than a month's rent for some. When he reached the camera feed, an old man in a faded brown delivery uniform stood patiently, box in hand, sweat on his brow. Adrian pressed the intercom button with a smirk, his voice carrying the practiced arrogance of someone who had never been denied anything. "You look like you belong in a museum, not delivering packages," he said, laughing to himself. The old man didn't flinch, just looked up at the camera and waited. "You know this is private property, right?" Adrian added, testing him, pushing for a reaction. Still, the man said nothing, his eyes calm, his hands steady, as though he had heard worse many times before. That made Adrian scoff. He wasn't used to being ignored. "Whatever," he muttered, buzzing the gate open and stepping outside into the blinding sunlight. The man held out the small package with both hands, his voice quiet and respectful. "Delivery for Mr. and Mrs. Kingsley." Adrian rolled his eyes, snatching it carelessly without a thank you, glancing at the sender's name without reading it. Yeah, just drop it and go. You've done your job, Grandpa." The man's eyes met Adrian's for just a second, deep brown, almost familiar. But Adrian looked away. "I should report you for breathing too close to the gate," Adrian added with a snide chuckle. Still, no reaction, just a slight nod and a slow turn back toward the road. As the delivery man walked away, Adrian pulled out his phone and started recording. "Hey guys," he said to the camera, flashing his perfect teeth and faux charm. POV. When your ancestors crawl out of the past to deliver your Amazon order. He flipped the camera to show the old man's back as he walked toward a rusted bicycle leaned against the wall. "Respect the hustle, I guess," Adrian sneered, though his tone dripped depth, mockery. He laughed louder when the man slipped slightly on the curb, but caught himself with surprising grace. 10 points for agility, he quipped, before cutting the video and uploading it. Within minutes, it already had views. Inside the house, Adrian barely noticed his mother watching from the kitchen window. She said nothing, but her face dropped, her lips pressed tightly together as if holding in a scream. She didn't scold him, not yet, but she watched the delivery man with a strange pain in her eyes. Adrian walked past her like she was part of the wallpaper, tossing the package onto the counter. Old fossil couldn't even say thank you, he joked. His mother didn't respond, only whispered softly. He didn't have to. But Adrian had already gone upstairs, back to his world of screens and ego. Later that night, the housekeeper Jonas found Adrian's phone still buzzing with likes and laughing emojis. "You're famous again," Jonas commented as he placed it on the desk beside Adrian, who smirked without even looking up. "It's just harmless fun," Adrian said, brushing it off like lint on his shirt. Jonas hesitated, then asked carefully, "Do you ever think about how others might feel in those videos?" Adrian scoffed. "I'm not a charity, Jonas. People need to grow thicker skin." The housekeeper looked at him, then looked away, sighing under his breath. "You'll understand one day," Jonas muttered. But Adrian wasn't listening. Adrian's world was fast. Likes, followers, sponsored posts, and shallow friendships that faded as quickly as they came. He lived for the next trend, the next laugh, the next viral moment that made him feel seen, even if it came at someone else's expense. He never paused to think about the lives on the other side of the screen. The delivery man? Just another nameless face. One of thousands he passed by without blinking. But that night, for some reason, his laugh didn't echo as loud. And somewhere deep down he couldn't forget those eyes. Across town, in a small, creaky apartment, the delivery man removed his uniform and folded it carefully. He sat at a worn dining table under a flickering light bulb and opened a photo album filled with faded memories. One photo showed a much younger man, holding a baby, smiling, proud, and unrecognizable from the man who had stood at Adrian's gate. He looked at that picture for a long time before touching the boy's face gently. "You've grown," he whispered to no one, and a single tear slid down his cheek. The night fell heavy, and while Adrian slept soundly in his king-size bed, the city carried on without him. Streetlights flickered, tires splashed through puddles, and people like the delivery man disappeared into the shadows, unnoticed and unthanked. But something had shifted. A thread had been pulled. A clock had started ticking. And though Adrian didn't know it yet, the man he had mocked was about to become the very person who would change everything. The next morning began with a strange stillness in the Kingsley mansion, the kind of quiet that hums with anticipation rather than peace. Adrian walked into the dining room yawning, brushing a hand through his messy hair, still oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his feet. His mother sat at the table, her tea untouched, her eyes distant and red-rimmed from a sleepless night. "You okay?" he asked casually, more out of politeness than concern. She looked up, startled by his voice, then offered a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she whispered. But Jonas, standing by the window, caught the truth in her expression. Adrian dropped into his seat and began scrolling through his phone, grinning at the sudden spike in his video's views. "Over 80K, he said proudly. "At this rate, I'll be on a podcast next week." Mrs. Kingsley flinched slightly, but Adrian didn't notice. He was already lost in his own world, laughing at a comment about the delivery man shuffle. Jonas cleared his throat, and Adrian looked up. "What?" he asked, defensively. "Nothing," Jonas replied, his voice calm, yet laced with judgment. That afternoon, the doorbell rang again, 3 short chimes that echoed through the marble halls like a warning shot. Adrian, lounging in the living room, shouted, "Jonas, get that." But Jonas didn't move. Instead, Miss Kingsley stood slowly and walked to the door herself, her hand trembling as she opened it. There, once again, stood the man Adrian had mocked, his cap in his hand this time, eyes soft and steady. Mrs. Kingsley inhaled sharply, a rush of memories hitting her like wind through an open window. "You came," she whispered, and the man nodded, quietly stepping inside. Adrian heard the voice and sat up straighter, trying to place it, then stiffened when he saw the delivery man in the foyer. "You again?" he said, rolling his eyes. "What, here to give me another life lesson?" His mother's eyes snapped to him, and for the first time in years her voice rose. "Adrian, enough." He blinked, confused. "Mom?" he asked, but her next words changed everything. "This man is your father." The words struck like thunder in a cathedral, echoing in Adrian's ears as the air thickened with silence. He stared at his mother first, his jaw slack, unable to process the confession. Then his eyes flicked to the delivery man, his supposed father, whose face now looked eerily familiar. "No," Adrian said, backing up, his voice shaking. "You're joking. This is insane." But no one laughed. His mother nodded slowly, her face full of pain and regret. "I kept it from you, and I was wrong." Adrian turned to Jonas, searching for denial, but Jonas only lowered his gaze. "You knew?" Adrian asked, heart pounding like a drum. Jonas didn't answer. Adrian took a shaky breath and stepped back further. "So what? He just shows up, and now he's my dad." After 18 years, his voice cracked under the pressure. The man stepped forward gently, his voice calm and low. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came because it's time you knew the truth." The room seemed smaller now, the air suffocating, memories Adrian didn't have suddenly demanding space in his chest. His mind flashed with brief images, his mother crying alone at night, birthdays that always felt like something was missing, a man's voice he once thought he dreamed as a child. The delivery man's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but he didn't move closer. "I wanted to be part of your life, Adrian," he said, "but I wasn't allowed to, and I didn't want to ruin what you had." Adrian's face burned with anger, confusion, and betrayal all at once. "Well, you just did." Adrian stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him as the walls seemed to shake with the force of truths that had waited too long to be spoken. Mrs. Kingsley sank into a chair, her body folding like a paper fan, and Jonas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. The man, his name still unspoken, remained standing, watching the closed door with an expression of both pain and hope. "He needs time," Mrs. Kingsley said softly. "He's angry." The man nodded. "So was I," he replied. For 18 years. Upstairs, Adrian paced his room like a trapped animal, his thoughts spiraling, his heart pounding. The video, the laughter, the mockery, it all played in his head with new, horrible clarity. He remembered every word he said, every exaggerated move, every cruel joke made at the man who now claimed to be his father. His pride had never felt heavier, never more poisonous. He hated him. He hated his mum. He hated himself, and beneath that hate was a quiet, terrifying ache of something he didn't yet understand. The house was quiet that night, the kind of silence that wrapped around everything like thick fog. Adrian sat in the dark of his room, the glow of his phone screen barely lighting his tense face. His viral video played on repeat, the laughter from strangers growing quieter with every replay. What once gave him pride now filled him with a sickening knot in his chest. He had mocked a man he didn't know, a man who was his father, and now the weight of his words felt like chains around his neck. Every frame reminded him of what he had destroyed before even knowing what he had. Downstairs, his mother and the man, his father, sat at opposite ends of the couch, both surrounded by unspoken words. A steaming mug of untouched tea sat between them, growing cold with each passing minute. "You should have told him," the man said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "He deserved the truth." Mrs. Kingsley nodded slowly, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. I was scared and ashamed. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words she'd buried for years. "You were gone," she said, turning toward him, her face lined with regret. "You left, and I didn't know if you'd ever come back." He sighed, not out of frustration, but from the heavy fatigue of time lost. "I never stopped trying," he replied, "but your family, your father, they kept me away." Mrs. Kingsley nodded, as if confirming a truth she had never said aloud. "And when they died, I had no strength left to open that door again." Silence stretched between them once more, thick with pain. Meanwhile, Adrian found himself standing outside his own room, unsure of why he'd opened the door. His legs moved on their own, pulling him slowly toward the stairs, toward the living room below. He paused at the top, peeking through the banister as their voices drifted up, like a fogged memory. He saw them sitting in stillness, his mother looking smaller than he'd ever noticed, and the man who looked both familiar and foreign. His hands clenched the railing, his knuckles pale. A part of him wanted to scream. Another part wanted to ask why it had taken so long for the truth to matter. Finally, he stepped down, his footsteps soft but deliberate. The room grew still as he entered, the tension shifting into something heavier than silence. He looked at his mother first, then at the man whose eyes mirrored his own. "I need to know everything," he said quietly, "from the beginning. No lies, no more hiding." The man nodded and leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with sorrow. "Your mother and I met in college," he began. "We were kids, stupidly in love, full of big dreams and no plans." Adrian listened, arms folded, heart pounding. "Then came you, unexpected but perfect," the man continued. "Her parents didn't approve of me, said I was beneath them." He smiled bitterly. "They made sure I knew it. They offered me money to leave," he said, voice heavy with memory. "I refused at first, but they made things hard." Mrs. Kingsley looked down, her fingers ringing nervously in her lap. "I tried to fight it," she whispered, "but I was young, scared, and they controlled everything." Adrian looked from one to the other, trying to reconcile the images he had of them with the truth unraveling before him. "So you left?" he asked. The man nodded. "I was forced out, but I never stopped loving you." Adrian's breath caught in his throat, the ache of resentment warring with something softer and more dangerous: empathy. He wasn't ready to forgive, but something inside him shifted, like a door unlocking just a crack. "You could have written, called something," he said, his voice shaking. "I tried," his father replied. "I have a drawer full of returned letters." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope, placing it gently on the coffee table. "The last one I ever wrote. Your 17th birthday." Adrian stared at it. The envelope yellowed and creased with age. His name was written in neat, careful script, slightly smudged where water had touched it. He didn't pick it up, he couldn't. Not yet. But it felt like holding a photo of a memory he never had. "This doesn't fix anything," he whispered. "But it's something," his father said softly. "And it's yours." Adrian sat alone in the living room after they'd gone to bed, the house quiet once again but pulsing with echoes of truth. The envelope lay in front of him like a time bomb, small and worn, but heavy with years of silence. His fingers hovered over it, unsure, unsteady, unwilling to tear open something that might change everything. Part of him was angry that one letter could carry so much weight. Another part was terrified of what it might say, or what it might not. The boy who had gone viral for mocking a stranger now sat trembling before a paper window to the past. And for the first time, he realized how little he knew of his own story. He tore the envelope open carefully, as though the slightest rip might erase the words within. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, neat but faintly crumpled at the edges. Its scent dusty with time. The handwriting was strong, the curves of each letter deliberate, like someone had written it through clenched emotions. "My son," it began, and that alone made Adrian stop breathing. No one had ever called him that, not like this, not from someone who meant it with everything. He swallowed hard and kept reading, each sentence a slow unspooling of a forgotten soul. His father's voice echoed in the silence between lines, finally given a place to live. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," the letter said, "but if you do, know that I never stopped thinking about you." Adrian's throat tightened as he read, feeling the sincerity push past every wall he had built. "I watched from afar when I could, hoping you were happy, wishing I could be proud from somewhere close." His father spoke of birthdays missed, milestones imagined, and apologies that time never let him speak aloud. "You didn't deserve a ghost for a dad," the letter read, "but I became one anyway." Adrian's eyes stung as he imagined a man sitting in some cold apartment, writing words he believed might never be seen. "Forgive me, or don't, but know that I love you, and that love never stopped." Adrian folded the letter back slowly, his hands now trembling less with fear and more with understanding. There was grief in those pages, but also love, love that had waited in silence, tucked away in a drawer. He placed the letter on the table gently, like something sacred, and leaned back into the couch with 1,000 thoughts spiraling. The room felt heavier now, not with burden but with the sudden weight of unspoken truth. And somewhere inside him, something cracked. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. His pride, once so loud, now felt foolish and small in the presence of real sacrifice. His eyes drifted to the hallway where his father had earlier stood, unsure and unseen. Sleep didn't come easily that night, but it did come, wrapped in a strange mix of sorrow and strange comfort. In his dreams, Adrian saw himself as a child walking beside a man with his own eyes, laughter echoing through the fog. He awoke before sunrise, the light still soft, and walked to the kitchen barefoot and quiet. There was a note on the fridge, his mum's handwriting, telling him she'd gone for a walk to clear her head. The house felt different now, like something unseen had shifted, like something sacred had been returned. Adrian sat at the table staring into space until a knock at the door startled him. It was soft, hesitant, almost respectful. He opened the door to find his father standing there, not with a box or package, but with a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. "Didn't think you'd sleep," he said, offering one with a faint, familiar smile. Adrian took it without a word, the warmth seeping into his fingers as he stepped aside. They sat on the porch together, the silence between them no longer hostile, but heavy with meaning. "That letter," Adrian began, his voice cracking under the weight. "I read it." His father nodded, his eyes never leaving the early morning horizon. "I didn't expect it to fix anything," the man said softly, "but I needed you to know." Adrian looked at him, really looked this time, not as a delivery man, not as a stranger, but as a piece of himself that had always been missing. "It didn't fix anything," Adrian replied, "but it made me want to try." The man's eyes glistened as he nodded, a smile flickering in the corners of his mouth. "That's all I've ever wanted. A chance." The words hung there, fragile but alive. "So, what now?" Adrian asked, barely above a whisper. His father took a deep breath, then looked at him with cautious hope. "Now," he said, pausing, "now we stop pretending we're strangers." Adrian nodded slowly, letting the words settle. It wouldn't be easy, not after so many broken years, but the road ahead felt possible now. Not paved with guilt, but with quiet attempts to build something real. As the sun rose behind them, Its golden light cast long shadows on the porch, and in that fragile dawn, father and son sat side by side, sipping coffee brewed with regret and redemption. The next morning the mansion was quiet except for the occasional hum of the central air and the faint tapping of Jonas preparing breakfast. Adrian descended the stairs in his usual slow, proud manner, yawning dramatically as if waking up was some unbearable burden. "Anything exciting today?" he mumbled, already scrolling through his phone, smirking at the comments under his latest video. "You're savage, bro," one read. Another comment asked, "Did he cry afterward?" And Adrian laughed to himself. "People are so sensitive," he muttered. Jonas just nodded silently and slid a glass of orange juice across the table. From across the room, Mrs. Kingsley stood near the mail basket, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up a thin brown envelope with no return address. Her eyes scanned the handwriting, and her breath caught as if she'd been punched in the stomach. She didn't say a word, just tucked it beneath the rest of the mail and excused herself quietly. Adrian barely noticed her leave. He was too engrossed in his phone and the shallow approval it offered him. But Jonas noticed, and his eyes followed her with a strange tension, like he'd seen this kind of quiet storm before. Later that day, Adrian drove to the mall in his sleek black convertible, music blasting, sunglasses on, his face hiding behind filtered confidence. He met up with his friends, boys just like him, entitled, loud, laughing at everything and nothing. They played games in arcades, flirted with girls they had no intention of calling, and spent money like it didn't come from someone else's hard work. At lunch, Adrian brought up the video again, pulling it up to show his crew. "Check out the way he walks away, like he still has pride," Adrian snorted. His friends roared with laughter, and one of them said, "Bet he doesn't even have a retirement plan." But at the edge of the food court, a young woman sitting with her child overheard them and looked up sharply. Her face changed when she saw the video, and something in her eyes darkened, like a storm behind glass. She didn't speak, but she watched Adrian closely, her lips pressed in a disapproving line. Adrian noticed her glare but shrugged it off, whispering to his friend, "Jealous people everywhere, man." Yet something about her expression stuck with him longer than expected. There was a weight in her eyes that felt oddly familiar, like she'd known something he hadn't been told. Back at home, Mrs. Kingsley sat alone in her room, the brown envelope opened on her lap, the contents trembling in her hand. Inside was a single photo, old, creased, slightly faded, of her holding baby Adrian beside a man with kind eyes and strong hands. On the back of the photo, written in cursive, were just 5 words: "He deserves to know now." Her chest tightened as tears welled in her eyes, and she clutched the photo to her chest. She had buried the truth for years, out of shame, protection, and fear of judgment. But the past had finally arrived, quietly, and on a bicycle, and she knew the delivery man wouldn't stay silent much longer. That evening, while Adrian played video games upstairs, Jonas knocked gently on Mrs. Kingsley's door. She didn't speak, just handed him the photo and nodded. Jonas looked at it and closed his eyes for a long, steady breath. "You kept this hidden for too long," he whispered. "He has a right to know." She wiped her tears and said softly, "I was trying to protect him, but I may have only protected his ignorance." Jonas sighed and placed the photo back in her hand. "Then it's time to correct that," he said gently. As night fell, the delivery man, whose name still hadn't been spoken, sat once again in his quiet apartment. He opened a second letter he had written, but not yet mailed. Inside, it read, "You don't have to forgive me, but you should know the truth. I watched you grow up from afar, proud of every step, broken by every mile between us. I never stopped caring. I never stopped loving your mother, and I never stopped loving you. He folded the letter carefully and placed it next to the first photograph. Then he stared at the wall for a long time. Somewhere deep in the city's hum, a clock was ticking. Not the kind that hangs on walls, but the kind that exists inside regrets and second chances. Adrian still believed he ruled the world with his confidence and camera lens. He hadn't yet felt the crack forming beneath his feet, but the foundation of his life was shifting, and the people around him had already begun to brace for the truth. The story he thought he knew, the one he'd built around pride and performance, was quietly unraveling behind closed doors, and all it would take was one conversation, one confrontation, to bring it crashing down. A truth was coming, with the force of years buried in silence. And in the silence of the night, Mrs. Kingsley stood at Adrian's door with the photo in her hand, hesitating to knock. Behind that door was her son, proud, blind, lost in a world of masks. But behind her stood the past, waiting. She knew once she knocked, nothing would ever be the same. She raised her hand, but instead of knocking, she cried. The porch was quiet, except for the occasional chirp of morning birds and the distant hum of the waking city. Adrian shifted in his seat, the steam from the coffee still curling between them like unsaid words. His father, whose name he barely used, sat there looking older in the light. Tired eyes, sun-worn skin, and a weight behind every blink. It wasn't awkward silence. It was the kind of stillness that comes before something important, something overdue. Adrian cleared his throat, unsure where to begin, because how do you confront years in a single morning? "Why did you leave?" he asked, finally, his voice low but sharp with the ache of abandonment. The man didn't flinch, just exhaled slowly like he'd waited years for that question. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," he said, his voice like gravel and sorrow stitched together. "Your mum and I, we were just kids trying to survive, and things got too hard, too fast." Adrian blinked. The idea of his mother being anything other than strong almost alien. "I wasn't clean back then. Not proud of it," he continued, fingers curling around his cup. "She kicked me out, and I deserved it. But I fought to stay close, even if you never saw me." The silence grew heavier, stretching between them like a canyon of regrets. "So, you were there?" Adrian asked, his mind spinning through old birthdays and moments he thought were ignored. "I was there," his father replied, nodding slowly, "at your school plays, standing at the back, at the park on your 9th birthday, pretending I was just passing by." Adrian's hands tensed slightly, heart hammering against the realization that the ghost he resented had always been nearby. "Your mum didn't want me confusing you. Said it was better if you forgot me," the man added. "She wasn't wrong, I was a mess, but I never stopped loving you." Adrian stared at the wooden floor beneath his feet, trying to match the truth to the memories. He remembered a man once watching from the corner of the field, a familiar stranger he had thought nothing of. He had no idea that man had been watching his entire childhood in silence. "I hated you," Adrian whispered, his voice sharp with pain and trembling honesty. "Every time I saw other kids with their dads, I told myself you didn't care." His father nodded, his face softening with guilt, but also something like relief that it was finally being said. "I know," he replied quietly, "and I accepted that hate because I gave you every reason to feel it." The admission didn't erase anything, but it made something inside Adrian shift. Pain has a different shape when it's finally spoken aloud. I needed you to be someone, even if it was someone to blame." The morning wore on, and the sun crept higher, but neither moved from the porch, both lost in the past. "What about now?" Adrian asked, his voice quieter. "Are you okay?" His father laughed lightly, but there was no humor in it, just a weary honesty. "I get by." he said. Delivering boxes is the easy part. Carrying what I lost is harder. Adrian looked at him and saw not a delivery man anymore, but a man trying to rebuild from wreckage. And, for the first time, he didn't feel anger, just sorrow. "You're not what I expected," Adrian admitted, shaking his head. "I thought you'd be this cold, careless loser who just gave up." His father smiled sadly, eyes fixed on a crack in the porch railing. "I was a loser," he said plainly. "But I never stopped hoping for this moment." Adrian exhaled, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. "I'm not ready to call you Dad yet," he said slowly. "But I don't want to pretend you're a stranger anymore." His father nodded, the glisten in his eyes betraying more emotion than his steady voice. "That's more than I ever thought I'd get." A car passed by, blaring music, shaking them briefly from the emotional stillness. Adrian suddenly remembered the video, the one that started it all, and the comment section now filled with sympathy instead of hate. "You saw the video, right?" he asked, half cringing. "Yeah," his father replied with a half smile. "I wasn't sure if I should be proud or pissed." Adrian laughed, genuinely for the first time in what felt like weeks. Well, it was a messed up way to meet, but maybe it happened for a reason. The words hung in the air like an olive branch. His father just nodded, sipping the last of his now cold coffee. The wind picked up slightly, rushing past them like time itself, trying to move forward. "I'd like to talk more sometime," Adrian said, standing slowly. "Maybe not all at once, but little by little." His father stood too, looking both hopeful and afraid to hope. "I'd like that," he said simply. "No deliveries, no pretending, just us." Adrian nodded, watching as the man walked down the steps and paused at the curb. "Hey," Adrian called out. "Next time, maybe stay for dinner." The next evening, as rain drizzled softly against the windows, Adrian heard another knock on the door, gentler this time, hesitant, like someone unsure of their welcome. He paused his game, heart fluttering a little, as he walked slowly down the stairs, every creak beneath his feet echoing with possibility. When he opened the door, it was him again, his father, holding a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of garlic and nostalgia. "Didn't want to come empty-handed," the man said with a nervous smile, lifting the bag as if it were a peace offering. Adrian blinked, unsure if he was ready, but something inside him softened at the familiar awkwardness. "Come in," he muttered, stepping aside, the house feeling suddenly warmer. His father wiped his shoes carefully on the mat, as though he didn't want to leave a mark. They sat at the kitchen table that hadn't seen a real family meal in months, the flickering overhead light casting long shadows on the walls. Adrian opened the bag and found containers of spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite meal as a child, something his mother hadn't cooked in years. "You remembered," he said quietly, pulling out plates as the smell triggered memories he hadn't dared revisit. "I never forgot," his father replied, setting napkins down like it was sacred tradition. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was careful, reverent, as if speaking too loud might shatter the moment. They ate slowly, in silence at first, but each bite seemed to melt another layer of tension. Adrian's eyes lingered on the man's hands, rough, worn and stained from work. Hands that once held him but hadn't been close in years. "I used to imagine what it'd be like," Adrian said, wiping sauce from his lips. "Sitting like this, just talking, like a normal family." His father nodded, swallowing hard, his throat clearly thick with regret. "I used to stand outside this house and pray for a night like this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Even when you hated me, I never stopped hoping you'd forgive me someday." Adrian looked down at his fork, pushing the noodles gently, as guilt gnawed at the edges of his heart. "I didn't hate you," he said after a pause. "I hated what I thought you were." His father leaned back slightly, as if the words both relieved and pained him. Sometimes what people think we are is louder than what we really are, he said softly, and sometimes we're too broken to shout over it. Adrian nodded slowly, understanding more now than he ever had before. I was angry, he confessed, because I needed someone to blame for all the cracks I saw in my life. His father reached out but stopped short, resting his hand near Adrian's, unsure if it would be welcomed. You don't owe me anything, he said, but I want to be someone who's finally worth knowing. Lightning flashed distantly outside, illuminating the room in a sudden silver wash that faded just as quickly. The two sat in its echo, hearts open in a way neither of them thought possible. Just days ago. Mom doesn't talk about you, Adrian said, his voice cautious. She was trying to protect you. And herself, his father replied. I understand now that silence was her armor, even if it made me invisible. Adrian nodded, the complexity of family suddenly more real than anything school had taught him. Maybe it's time we stopped pretending the past didn't happen, he said. Maybe we both deserve better than ghosts. They moved to the living room. Old photo albums sitting untouched on a nearby shelf, gathering more dust than memories. You want to see something? Adrian asked, pulling one down with fingers that hesitated before touching the cover. His father leaned closer, his breath catching slightly when he saw the baby pictures, tiny moments he had missed, now frozen in glossy pages. You were beautiful, he whispered, eyes watering as he traced a photo of Adrian in a blue onesie. I used to keep a copy of this in my wallet, he added, voice cracking like old leather. Adrian looked at him, surprised, unsure whether to smile or cry. Really? He asked, his voice more vulnerable than he expected. His father reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a worn wallet with faded stitching and sliding out a folded, creased photo. It was the same image, Adrian at 6 months old, grinning toothlessly with spaghetti sauce on his cheeks. You kept this all this time? Adrian asked, staring at the photo like it had just been pulled from a time machine. Through every job, every city, every lonely night, his father replied. I didn't have you, but I had this. Adrian felt something break open inside him. A wall, a wound, maybe both. You weren't there, but you never really left. And with those words, something like healing began. As the clock ticked past midnight, neither of them seemed in a hurry to end the night. You know, Adrian said, standing to clear the dishes. This wasn't half bad for a first dinner. His father chuckled, helping him carry the plates to the sink. Next time I'll bring dessert, he offered, smiling through eyes still slightly red. Adrian didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either, and that was something. They washed dishes side by side. Strangers beginning to become something more. In the quiet beneath the hum of the kitchen light, the story they thought was over started again, and neither of them was quite ready to say goodbye. The morning after that unexpected dinner felt like waking from a dream. Adrian didn't want to end. The air in the house was softer, as though even the walls were relieved to finally breathe. He came downstairs to find a note on the kitchen table, written in his father's familiar, slanted handwriting. Thanks for letting me in, it read. I left something in the garage I think you'll want to see. Adrian blinked, heart tapping nervously, as he grabbed the key that had been left beside the note. He had no idea what to expect, but a strange flutter of hope carried him down the hallway. The garage door creaked open, and the musty smell of oil and old memories spilled out. The light flickered on slowly, illuminating an old motorcycle tucked under a faded tarp. Adrian stepped closer, fingers trembling as he pulled back the cover, and gasped. It was the same vintage bike his dad used to ride when Adrian was just a toddler, the one in the pictures from birthday picnics and late afternoon joyrides. The paint was worn, the leather cracked, but it stood like a memory brought back to life. There was a folded photo taped to the handlebar, showing Adrian as a child, helmet too big, laughing in front of the bike. His throat tightened as he held the image. The echo of laughter from a time he barely remembered now ringing in his ear. He didn't hear his mother step into the doorway until she spoke softly, her voice fragile like glass. He kept it all these years, she said. Said it reminded him of who he was and who he wanted to be again. Adrian nodded slowly, unable to speak through the knot in his throat. The bike wasn't just metal and wheels. It was a symbol of everything that had been lost, and maybe, just maybe, could be rebuilt. He said he wants to teach you how to ride it, she added. Said it's time you had more than just memories. Adrian looked at the seat, imagining his younger self there again, and for the first time he felt ready to meet that part of himself halfway. Later that afternoon, his father returned, this time with a backpack slung over his shoulder and oil stains on his hands. Did you see it? He asked, hesitant, like a man offering more than just a gift, offering connection. Adrian nodded. It's beautiful, he said, his voice cracked with sincerity. His father smiled, the kind of smile that says thank you without words. They rolled the bike out together, side by side, as if building something brick by brick. You ever ridden one before? His father asked. No, Adrian replied, but I'm ready to learn. The sun dipped low as his father taught him how to balance, how to shift gears, how to lean gently into turns. It wasn't perfect. Adrian stalled twice and nearly tipped once, but each failure came with laughter instead of shame, and each laugh was a thread, weaving the space between them tighter and warmer. His father never raised his voice, never rushed him, just stood nearby, always ready to catch or steady. You've got good instincts, he said after the fifth run. You just need to trust them. Adrian nodded, feeling something unfamiliar and sacred. Pride, not from achievement, but from presence. For the first time, he didn't feel like a spoiled kid trying to act tough. He felt like a son learning from his father. That night, as they sat on the porch, drinking cold soda and listening to crickets, Adrian asked a question he'd held on to for years. Why didn't you come back sooner? His father stared into the distance for a moment, the glow from the streetlight catching the weariness in his face. Because I thought I had to fix myself before I could face you, he said. But the truth is, I was scared you wouldn't want me anymore. Adrian looked at him, the once stranger now becoming someone achingly familiar. I didn't, he replied quietly. But I do now. His father turned to him, eyes glassy, and said, That means more than you know. The next few days were filled with moments Adrian never expected to have again. Helping his dad tune the bike, learning to grill meat just right, even watching old movies his mum used to complain about. The three of them weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that was more than Adrian had ever dared to wish for. His mum started leaving the door open when she cooked, no longer hiding her sadness in the kitchen. His father began showing up with groceries instead of apologies, and with stories instead of silence. The walls between them, once built of years and mistakes, slowly began to crumble, and in their place, something new was being built. Honest, fragile, and beautiful. Adrian felt it every time he laughed without guilt or hugged without hesitation. One morning, Adrian walked into his room and found another envelope on his desk, this time addressed to my son. Inside was a letter, handwritten again, with fingerprints smudging the ink. His father wrote about the day Adrian was born, the first time he held him, and how he used to sneak into his nursery just to watch him breathe. I didn't know how to be a father back then, the letter said, but I never stopped wanting to be yours. Adrian read it twice, then 3 more times, each word pressing deeper into his chest. By the end, he was crying, quietly, fully, and without shame. And when he finally looked up, he knew exactly what he needed to do next. He grabbed the phone, his hands still shaking, and texted his father, "Thanks for everything. I want a ride again this weekend. Just you and me." The reply came almost instantly. "Nothing would make me happier, son." Adrian smiled, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with gifts or gear. He looked out the window, where the bike sat gleaming under a tarp, not just a machine, but a monument to second chances. The boy who once mocked a delivery man had begun to see the man behind the uniform, and in doing so, he had discovered something far more valuable than pride or rebellion. He had discovered the beating, imperfect heart of family. The following day felt quieter than usual, but not in an empty way, in a curious, reflective kind of silence that follows a deep conversation. Adrian sat at his desk, staring at his homework, but hearing only the echo of his father's voice from the night before. He couldn't stop thinking about the photo, that tiny frozen moment his father had carried through years of absence. It made everything feel heavier and softer at the same time, like a weight wrapped in a memory. Downstairs, his mother moved about in the kitchen, unaware of the shift that had begun in her son's heart. Adrian wondered how long she had been carrying her own silence, her own unanswered questions, and for the first time in a long time, he wanted to ask. He walked downstairs slowly, like approaching a fragile moment that might crumble if disturbed too quickly. His mother looked up from the stove, surprised to see him without his usual headphones or sarcastic tone. "Can we talk?" he asked, the words foreign on his tongue but firm in his chest. She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face carefully neutral. "What's going on, Adrian?" she asked, her voice lined with guarded concern. He hesitated for a beat, then said, "He came by again last night." Her eyes flickered, pain, surprise, and something unreadable. But she said nothing. "We ate dinner," Adrian continued, watching her face as he spoke. "He brought spaghetti, the kind you used to make when I was a kid." She sat down at the table, her shoulders slowly lowering, as if bracing for something she knew would eventually come. "He's trying," Adrian added, softer this time, more to himself than to her, "and I think I want to try too." His mother looked away, blinking fast, but Adrian could see the shimmer of old tears resurfacing. "I never wanted you to hate him," she whispered, "but I didn't know how to explain everything without falling apart." Adrian sat across from her, leaning in like he might reach for the truth with both hands. "Why did he really leave?" he asked, not accusing, but searching, hungry for clarity. She exhaled slowly, as if the years had been waiting for this one breath. "It wasn't just money or pride," she said, eyes distant. "It was pain. He was hurting, and he didn't know how to stay while feeling so broken." Adrian listened closely, his heart cracking open a little more with each word. "And I was too angry to forgive him," she added. "So I locked the door, and he stayed on the other side." "I should have told you more," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I was afraid you'd choose him over me." Adrian shook his head, feeling both the love and fear tangled in her confession. "I didn't want to choose," he said. "I just wanted to understand why everything felt so incomplete." She reached across the table, taking his hand gently, her thumb brushing the top like it did when he was younger. "Sometimes parents make mistakes," she whispered, "and sometimes the cost is years we can't get back." There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, like both were rewriting old pages in their shared story. Adrian stood up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out 2 mugs. "Tea?" he asked, and his mother smiled softly, like the first smile after a long cry. As they sipped in quiet understanding, the house felt lighter, as though something sacred had shifted between its walls. "He's coming again tonight," Adrian said. "I thought maybe you'd want to talk too." His mother looked at him, expression unreadable, but eyes full of emotion. "Maybe I do," she said. "Maybe it's time." That evening, Adrian cleaned the living room without being asked, fluffing pillows and wiping surfaces with unfamiliar care. He looked at the old photo frames on the mantel and realized how many stories they held and how many were missing. As the clock neared 7 era, his heart thumped louder, not out of fear, but out of hope. The doorbell rang, and this time, Adrian didn't hesitate to open it. His father stood there again, tired but smiling, holding a bag of pastries. "Didn't want to break tradition," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Come in," Adrian replied, stepping aside again, but this time not just for himself. His mother stood in the hallway, arms crossed, but not in anger, in defense, maybe, or out of habit. His father paused, unsure, then gave a small nod. "Hello, Grace," he said, voice soft and full of remorse. She didn't speak right away, but her eyes met his. Years of history, in a single glance. Adrian watched, breath held, as something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, regret, maybe even buried affection. "You still like lemon tarts?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the tension like a pin to a balloon. He smiled, genuinely this time. "Always." They sat at the table, three people who once were family, now trying to remember how to be that again. Conversation started slow, but soon old jokes resurfaced, tentative laughter echoing through the home. Adrian listened, heart swelling at the sight of his parents speaking like humans, and not just history. His mother wiped her eyes more than once, and his father never stopped saying, "I'm sorry," with every glance and gesture. The night stretched on, gentle and long, like a lullaby after years of noise. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel divided, and Adrian, he didn't feel alone anymore. The weekend arrived with skies stretched in blue silence and a promise of peace on the wind. Adrian stood beside the bike, helmet in hand, heart racing, not from fear, but from something deeper. His father walked out, already geared up, wearing the old leather jacket. Adrian remembered from photos and fragments of memory. "You ready, champ?" he asked, his voice calm and steady like an anchor in the tide. Adrian nodded, slipping on his helmet, the moment feeling more like a ceremony than a lesson. They started the engine, its familiar roar awakening something long dormant between them. This wasn't just a ride, it was a bridge back to everything they thought they'd lost. The road unfurled ahead, winding through the outskirts of town where the noise faded and nature whispered. Adrian held tight, not just for balance, but for the sense of connection he feared would vanish if he let go. The trees danced past them like flickers of forgotten joy, and the wind carried their silence in gentle waves. His father didn't speak much. He didn't have to. His presence was loud enough. They stopped at a cliffside viewpoint, the same one from an old photo. Adrian barely remembered. As they parked, his father handed him a small box, wrapped in brown paper. No note, just a look. "Open it when you're ready," he said, and walked toward the edge, staring out into the distance. Adrian followed slowly, his fingers tightening around the package like it held the weight of something sacred. When he finally opened it, his breath caught. It was a wristwatch, old and well-worn. The glass cracked slightly, the leather soft and creased. Inside the lid were tiny words carved in uneven handwriting. "Time lost can still be time found." Adrian looked up, eyes stinging, and saw his father watching him, hands in his pockets, eyes uncertain. "It was my dad's," he said. "He gave it to me before I ran off. I figured I'd pass it on when I finally found my way back." Adrian strapped it on, the weight of history and forgiveness tightening around his wrist. They rode again, this time in easy silence, the kind that only comes when there's nothing left to prove. The engine purred as they passed parks and schools, distant memories of happier days flashing like glimpses from another life. Adrian didn't want to talk. He wanted to absorb it, breathe it in, let every second imprint on his soul. They stopped for burgers at a roadside diner, laughed over greasy fries, and shared stories that healed more than they hurt. For the first time, Adrian heard about his dad's battles, jobs lost, nights slept in the van, mistakes he didn't know how to fix. And through every word, there wasn't shame, there was honesty, raw and rare. Adrian realized then that his dad wasn't trying to be perfect, he was just trying to be present. As the sun began to dip low, they rode back toward the neighborhood, the golden light softening everything it touched. When they reached home, Adrian asked, "Can we do this again next week?" His dad smiled, eyes gleaming beneath the helmet. "As long as you want me around," he replied. The words hit harder than Adrian expected, and he nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "Then, forever," Adrian said, voice barely audible over the cooling engine. The air between them thickened, not with tension, but with something healing. It was no longer a story about a broken father or a bitter son. It was about both of them, choosing to meet in the middle. That night, Adrian sat with his mum on the porch, the stars beginning to blink into view. She looked at him, eyes curious, hope peeking through her usual caution. "You two seem different," she said softly. Adrian leaned back, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think we both grew up a little," he replied. His mum chuckled gently, tears touching her lashes. "It's about time." And in that moment, Adrian saw not just a family fractured, but a family quietly, patiently coming back together. Before heading to bed, Adrian placed the old watch beside his phone, glancing at it once more. The crack in the glass reminded him that even broken things can keep perfect time. He thought about the delivery man he once mocked, and how behind every worn-out uniform might be a father, a son, a story untold. Gratitude settled into his chest, heavy but warm, like a blanket on a cold night. He didn't have all the answers, but he had forgiveness, and that was enough for now. As he turned off the lights, he whispered, "Thanks, Dad," to the quiet, and the silence that followed felt like a promise kept. The next morning brought a new kind of stillness, peaceful, not empty. Adrian found himself waking early, eager for a day that once would have felt boring. He helped his mum make breakfast, even offered to mow the lawn, simple things he never saw value in before. His phone buzzed with a message. "Proud of you. See you later, Dad." Adrian smiled, placing the phone face down and choosing to be fully present. He looked around the kitchen, the light hitting the counters just right. Maybe the world hadn't changed, but he had, and with that, everything finally felt possible. The doorbell rang early on a Saturday, sharp and unexpected like a note from the past. Adrian opened the door, expecting a package or another random flyer, but instead stood a stranger dressed sharply, eyes aged by time. He introduced himself with a quiet voice and a familiar face, saying, "I'm your grandfather, Samuel." Adrian blinked, stunned, the air between them heavy with disbelief and echoes of his father's features. "Your dad sent me," the man added gently, "said it's time we all stop running." Behind him, the morning sun painted everything gold as if blessing the reunion. Adrian stepped aside slowly, heart thumping, and let the man in. Samuel walked through the house like a ghost, stepping back into his old skin, touching walls and shelves with reverence. Adrian's mum came from the kitchen, gasping at the sight of him, her expression caught between shock and grief. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered, tears blooming instantly. He nodded solemnly, removing his cap, his thinning grey hair catching the kitchen light. "I wasn't a good father to your husband," he said, "but I don't want to be the same mistake twice." His voice cracked as he looked at Adrian. sorrow deeper than words flickering behind his eyes. They sat in the living room, each unsure how to begin a conversation, decades overdue. Samuel pulled out an envelope, thick with letters and photos, all dated, all yellowed with time. "These are pieces of him," he said, handing them to Adrian. "Things your dad sent me after you found him again." Adrian flicked through them, stunned. Photos of their ride, his first meal back, even the cracked watch on his wrist. "He's proud of you," Samuel added, smiling faintly. "Said you reminded him how to be a better man." The words hit like waves, slow and crashing, pushing back years of bitterness. Adrian's mum wiped her eyes, and for once the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of healing. Samuel stayed for lunch, sharing stories Adrian had never heard about his father as a boy, curious and wild, always building things and asking too many questions. There were tales of lost jobs, late-night apologies, and letters never sent. "He always wanted to come back," Samuel said, "but shame can build stronger walls than anger." Adrian listened intently, picturing a version of his father shaped by absence, not indifference. The stories filled in blanks he didn't know existed, painting a fuller picture of the man he'd misunderstood. With every word, the walls between them crumbled like dust, and in their place grew something rare, understanding. After lunch, Samuel asked to visit the garage, where Adrian kept his dad's old motorcycle. He walked around it slowly, as if greeting an old friend, fingers trailing the rusted frame with deep affection. "We built one just like this together," he whispered, voice trembling, "back when he still called me Dad with joy." Adrian watched him, moved by the quiet heartbreak in his posture, the regret in every breath. "He told me he still dreams of that bike," Samuel added, "even after everything." Adrian nodded, realizing how deep the connections ran through bolts, wheels, blood, and choices. In that garage, time folded in on itself, and 3 generations quietly reunited. Later that day, as Samuel prepared to leave, he turned to Adrian with a final request. "Don't let pride rob you of your future, the way it robbed me of mine," he said, his eyes shining. "Forgive faster, love louder, and always knock, even if you're not sure the door will open." Adrian swallowed hard, those words imprinting themselves on his soul like a permanent echo. "You have a rare chance, son," Samuel added, hand resting on his shoulder. "Don't waste it." Then he pulled him into a tight hug, one that carried the weight of generations. As Samuel's car drove off, Adrian and his mother stood in the driveway, silent under the setting sun. "He looks like your dad," she said softly. "Talks like him too," Adrian replied, still feeling the warmth of that final embrace. In that moment, something shifted inside him. Not just forgiveness, but clarity. He understood now that people are not just who they are in the moment, but everything they've survived. His father had come back, not perfect, but trying, and that was a kind of love most never get. Adrian reached into his pocket, feeling the watch, the letter, the stories, and he smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything was finally real. That night, Adrian wrote a letter of his own, addressed to Dad. He wrote about the ride, the watch, the stories, and the stranger who'd walked through their door carrying redemption. He told him he was proud of him, not because he was perfect, but because he came back. He ended the letter with 7 words that held more weight than any apology. "I'm glad you're my father again." He sealed it, knowing his dad would read it and understand. And as he drifted to sleep, Adrian felt peace, not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of love. In the quiet stillness of midnight, a new sound replaced the silence. It wasn't the hum of anger or the pulse of regret. It was the beat of something whole. A boy becoming a man, a father returning to his son, and a family remembering that love, no matter how delayed, still counts. Even if it starts with a knock at the door, the morning came with a different kind of silence, one that whispered healing rather than hurt. Adrian woke up earlier than usual, drawn to the garage by something he couldn't name. The old motorcycle sat in the corner, bathed in soft light, like a sleeping relic of the past. He ran his hand along the handlebars, feeling the cold metal pulse with memory. His father's watch ticked faintly on his wrist, the rhythm syncing with his breath. Today felt different. Today felt necessary. Adrian pushed the bike out slowly, wheeling it onto the driveway, like unveiling a tribute to everything they'd been through. His mum watched from the kitchen window, not saying a word, just nodding with tearful approval. He fueled it up with careful hands, remembering the way his father had shown him each part, each gear, like passing down a sacred ritual. As the engine sputtered to life, the noise shattered the stillness, but instead of chaos, it felt like a hymn, a rumbling, roaring hymn to forgiveness. Adrian put on his helmet, tightened the strap, and rode off. Not to escape, but to remember. Every turn of the road felt like riding through memories made and mended. He rode past the corner store where his father once stood, eyes distant, waiting for something he never thought would arrive. He passed the park where children played, and he remembered being one of them, waiting for a father who never showed. But now he understood the weight his father carried, the shame that kept him silent. At every red light he felt closer to him, not the version he hated, but the man beneath the pain. And with each mile, Adrian realized something profound. Sometimes love is late, but that doesn't make it any less real. And sometimes a ride isn't just a ride, it's a way home. He parked near the cemetery, the one he hadn't visited since his father's funeral. It was quiet, the wind carrying whispers of names engraved in stone. He walked slowly toward the grave, clutching the letter in his jacket pocket. As he stood before the tombstone, he didn't cry, not out of strength, but because he had already wept all the tears that hurt. What was left in him now was peace, and something stronger, gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, gratitude for the delivery man who turned out to be a father, reborn. Adrian knelt and placed the letter gently at the base of the headstone, pressing his hand to the cool marble. "You came back," he whispered. "You gave me the one thing I needed, truth." He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the wind pass over him like a blessing. "You weren't perfect, Dad," he said, voice steady. "But neither was I." In that moment, the distance between the living and the dead felt smaller than ever. He sat for a while, watching the clouds roll across the sky like silent messengers from something greater. For the first time, he didn't feel bitter or abandoned. He felt full of stories, full of meaning, full of moments he had almost missed. His dad may have delivered packages, but in the end he delivered something far more valuable. He delivered understanding. He delivered truth. And most importantly, he delivered. As he mounted the bike to head home, he looked back one more time, offering a silent promise. "I'll ride for us now," he said, "and I'll ride with purpose." The bike growled beneath him, eager to move forward, to chase sunlight instead of shadows. He didn't know where the road would take him next, but he wasn't afraid. His father had shown him the way, not just by riding, but by returning, and Adrian would never forget that. He passed the houses and schools, the mailboxes and street signs, but this time everything looked different. The world hadn't changed, but he had. He wasn't the same boy who mocked the man at the door, blind to the stories others carried. He was now someone who understood that everyone has a weight, a wound, a reason for silence. The ride home wasn't fast. It was steady, intentional, and soaked in grace. Every second was a tribute, a tribute to the father who refused to let the past define their ending. When Adrian reached home, he didn't put the bike back in the garage. He left it outside, in the open, proud and visible, just like the truth he now carried. His mother came out, her eyes soft, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "He would have been proud," she said, voice cracking just enough. Adrian nodded, holding back the tide swelling in his throat. "I know," he whispered, and for the first time, he believed. The day of the memorial came with a gentle drizzle, as though the sky itself mourned and remembered. Adrian stood by the modest gathering, watching people from different corners of his father's life show up. Neighbors, co-workers, old friends from the center. Each shared stories that painted a richer picture than Adrian had ever known. A man who laughed deeply, gave freely, and carried silent burdens with quiet strength. The man Adrian mocked was now being remembered as someone worth honoring. His mother stood beside him, stronger than ever, her arm linked with his. They were no longer a broken pair, they were a family mending at the seams, and in the stillness of that moment, Adrian finally felt what forgiveness truly meant. After the service, Adrian placed the watch, his father's watch, at the base of the tree they planted in his memory. He didn't want to let it go, but something told him it belonged here now, ticking quietly beneath the roots of remembrance. The tree would grow, just like Adrian, reaching toward the sky, fed by love, pain, and lessons learned. Around him, the wind whispered like his father's voice, soft, invisible, but unmistakably present. "Time doesn't heal," Adrian murmured. "It teaches." The words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt real, earned. He left the watch behind, not to forget, but to remember differently. Weeks passed, and Adrian kept journaling his thoughts through voice notes and video diaries. Raw, unfiltered windows into a young man reshaped by loss and love. His videos weren't flashy, but they struck chords, especially with teens who also carried resentment, pride, or confusion about family. One day, he received a message from a boy in another city. "I forgave my dad today. Your story gave me the strength." Adrian stared at the message for a long time, humbled and stunned. His pain had become someone else's peace. It was then he realized his father's final delivery wasn't just to their doorstep. It was to the world. He launched a quiet project in his father's name, a storytelling platform for everyday heroes. It wasn't about big achievements, but unseen sacrifices. A tired nurse, a delivery man, a single mom, a janitor who coached after hours. Every story posted reminded people to look again, to look deeper. Adrian featured others, not himself, and he wrote each caption like a son in a letter home. His father's legacy wasn't just being remembered, it was moving through others. It became a ripple of compassion, one that started with a knock on a door and a duffel bag full of truth. In school, Adrian no longer craved attention or validation. He found joy in helping classmates, in tutoring kids who struggled, in smiling at the people no one noticed before. He wasn't trying to be a saint. He was simply being aware. He'd learned the most important kind of respect is the kind that expects nothing back. His friends noticed, and a few followed suit, slowly shifting their energy too. The coolness wasn't in being cold anymore. It was in being kind. Pride had been replaced by presence. Sometimes he would walk the same street where it all began. The driveway, the gate, the steps leading to the front door. He would stop and imagine his dad standing there again, wearing that same blue jacket, looking nervous but full of hope. He saw it now, the courage it took to return after years of silence, and he honored it every day by living better than before. That doorstep had once been the scene of mockery, But now it was sacred, a place where a heart cracked open, a place where healing began. Adrian didn't become famous, but he became full of purpose, of love, of understanding. His mum smiled more too, her eyes clearer, her laughter no longer stained by memories. She once told him, "Your father left the world a little better because he made you better," and those words stayed with him like a second heartbeat. Life was still messy, unpredictable, sometimes painful, but it was also beautiful, because now he could see it through a different lens, a lens shaped by sacrifice and second chances. The man Adrian once mocked had become his greatest teacher, not through lectures or punishment, but through presence, return, and the humility of being human. That lesson, deeply etched into Adrian's soul, would never be forgotten. His father hadn't come back to rewrite the past, but to remind his son that the future was still his to build. And Adrian was building it with more love than pride, more gratitude than entitlement. Because sometimes the most extraordinary people come back, not for applause, but for forgiveness. And in that return, they deliver the most important message of all. As the credits of life rolled forward, Adrian carried that message like a light in his chest. He knew that somewhere, somehow, his father was proud, not because his son became someone special, but because he chose to see people as special. The final delivery wasn't a package. It was a perspective, a reminder that no one is ever just a role, a uniform, or a moment of weakness. They are a story, a sacrifice, a chance to forgive and be forgiven. Adrian now lived with his eyes open and his heart wider than before. And that, perhaps, was the greatest inheritance of all. And just like that, the boy who mocked a delivery man became the man shaped by his father's final delivery. Life has a way of revealing the truth in the most unexpected moments. And sometimes it only takes one knock on the door to change everything. If this story moved you, there's more where that came from. We're just getting started on uncovering powerful, emotional, and real-life inspired stories that reveal the deeper layers of the people around us. So if you love stories that hit the heart, challenge your thinking, and keep you watching until the very last second, don't just like, subscribe, because next time, the twist might hit even closer to home. This is where ordinary moments reveal extraordinary truths. Hit the bell so you never miss a delivery. The next few days passed with a strange stillness, as though time itself paused to respect the shift in Adrian's heart. He wasn't rushing to parties or glued to his phone anymore. He was simply present. Conversations with his mum became more than mumbled responses and shallow nods. They became bridges. Over dinner, they laughed gently about memories, cried when needed, and allowed silence to do its healing. The house that once echoed with tension now breathed with new air, like it had been holding its breath for years. Adrian wasn't perfect. He still wrestled with guilt and questions. But he was no longer running. He was standing still and facing things head-on. At school, people noticed the change, though they didn't quite know what to make of it. Adrian didn't snap at teachers anymore, or shove past janitors with that smug teenage indifference. He made room for others, nodded in respect, and even helped a cafeteria lady carry crates of fruit one morning. It wasn't about being praised. It was about honoring someone who used to wear a uniform too. That delivery uniform, once a symbol of shame to him, now felt like a badge of quiet valor. With every small act, Adrian felt like he was repaying a debt, not just to his father, but to every person he had ever dismissed as invisible. He kept the watch on, always, and sometimes during math class, he'd find his thumb brushing over it unconsciously. The ticking had become his reminder. Every second matters. Every heartbeat means something. One afternoon, he took out the second letter his father had left behind, unopened until now, It shook in his hands as he broke the seal, unsure if he was ready for more truths. But the words weren't bitter or heavy. They were soft, filled with a father's attempt at redemption. "Son, I never knew how to say the right things, but I never stopped wanting to," the letter began, and that one line tore something open and stitched something new. The letter went on to explain why he left, but more importantly, why he came back, not to fix the past, but to finally face it. He admitted his failures, his regrets, and the years he wasted pretending it was too late. But he ended with a plea for Adrian to live without the weight of resentment, to forgive, not just him, but himself. "Don't be hardened by my absence. Be softened by my return. Live better than I did, but love like I tried to." The letter didn't bring Adrian to tears this time. It brought him peace. That weekend, Adrian and his mom visited the community center, where they donated some of his dad's belongings, his cap, his jacket, and a toolbox with initials engraved on the side. The director was shocked when Adrian explained who the items had belonged to. "Your dad, he volunteered here last year," the man said with warm surprise. "Helped fix the roof, taught kids how to patch up their bikes, said he was just trying to make up for lost time." Adrian's throat tightened. The delivery man had left more behind than guilt. He'd left legacy. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep, but not because of pain or regret. He lay awake replaying moments with his father, not the absence, but the return. He remembered the soft smile at the door, the trembling voice, the weight of a duffel bag full of secrets and intentions. The same man he mocked had swallowed years of shame, just to stand before him again. He wondered how many others in the world were wearing masks of failure, hiding stories of sacrifice behind uniforms no one noticed. And suddenly, he felt the urge to tell that story, not just for his dad, but for everyone carrying unseen burdens. Adrian took his phone and opened a blank video journal, his hands trembling with purpose. "I used to think I had it all figured out," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "until the man I mocked turned out to be the one person who never stopped loving me." He spoke not as a victim or a hero, but as someone who finally understood pain, understood pride, understood how love sometimes arrives disguised in mistakes, and when he hit stop, he felt lighter than he had in years. The video, without filters or edits, went viral within days. People from all over shared stories of estranged fathers, of broken homes mended by truth, of delivery drivers, janitors, cooks, and mechanics who were so much more than their job titles. Adrian didn't expect it to explode, but maybe the world was just hungry for honesty. He wasn't chasing fame now, he was sharing purpose. He saw how stories could heal. His own story had, and now it was rippling into others. It was no longer about what he lost. It was about what had finally been found. As the sun rose outside his window, Adrian whispered a soft thank you into the morning light. Not for a perfect life, not for easy answers, but for the pain that led to clarity, for the mistake that birthed humility, and for the father who delivered truth at the door. And in that whisper there was a promise to love with intention, to live with grace, and to remember that sometimes the most extraordinary people wear the most ordinary clothes. Thank you for watching this powerful story of redemption, consequences, and the quiet strength that comes from true transformation. If you found yourself moved by this emotional journey, there's so much more ahead. We're just getting started. This is only one chapter in a world full of cautionary tales, life lessons, and raw human stories that reflect the truth behind our choices. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep, dramatic, and soul-stirring documentary. We dive deep into stories that make you feel, think, and sometimes even change. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay watching.